Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with Oklahoma Baptist men's basketball coach Jason Eaker is brought to you by Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. $38 a month, your chance to release a child from poverty. You can go many places to donate, to make a difference, to be charitable. The Lord calls us to be joyful with our giving. And yet, when we make that charitable donation, oftentimes we don't know where it's going. We don't know the effect it's going to have. Well, I'm here to tell you, for $38 a month, you are directly impacting and releasing a child from poverty through Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. That's the website. And when you get there, you will see a list of children waiting to be sponsored. You pray about it, you pick a child, you sponsor them, $38 a month, and you immediately begin the process of releasing them from poverty. It's the most trusted child development charity ministry in the world. I can't recommend it more. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum. Sponsor a child today. Today's guest on the podcast, Oklahoma Baptist University men's basketball coach Jason Eaker. And this is part one of our conversation with Coach Eaker. Now, Jason was named the OBU head coach in April of 2018, this year. And Oklahoma Baptist is a Division II program, for those of you wondering. Prior to that, he spent 15 years as a Division I assistant coach. He was with Mercer University from 2013 to 2018. And if you remember Mercer, if that name kind of rings a bell for you, Mercer was the team in 2014 that took March Madness by storm as a 14 seed, upsetting number 3 Duke. And of course, Coach K 78-71. Jason was a part of that program. Prior to that, he was with Liberty University as an assistant coach there from 2007 to 2013. Jason reached out to me. We connected on Twitter about 6 months ago, maybe even a year ago. And he shared with me his story. We got on the phone and we talked for probably about an hour a couple months back. And I just wanted to listen to his story, his journey. And some of my favorite podcasts that I do, that we have on here at Sports Spectrum, are the ones that people don't know the names of these guys. They're not the most popular people or famous people, but their stories are impactful, they're inspirational, they're powerful, and they can really help others. And that's why I love this podcast, because we have the opportunity to not only bring you the big names, but also bring you the stories of the people that you haven't heard of before. And Jason's story is exactly that. So here in part one of our conversation with Jason Eaker, we're going to learn about Oklahoma Baptist. We're going to learn about his journey in becoming a head coach for the very first time in college basketball and what that adjustment has been like. I also wanted to ask him just about recruiting. Recruiting is a necessary evil, if you will, in college sports, certainly college basketball, but it's a grind and it's hard. But it's necessary, and it also is rewarding in building relationships with these players. So here's part one of our conversation with Jason Eaker. Get to know him a little bit and get to know about Division II Oklahoma Baptist University here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. Jason, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Jason.
It's good to talk to you. I like your first name. You like my first name, so we're going to get along great right away, Coach. Let's talk about your first year here. You're starting your first year ever as a head coach in college basketball at Oklahoma Baptist. You've, like I mentioned, 15 years as a Division I assistant, and this is your first ever head coaching job. How's the adjustment been for you from assistant to being the head guy?
Well, it had always been a goal of mine since I started in coaching, like a lot of us longtime assistants, to be a head coach. And so probably 4 or 5 years ago, I kind of had given that goal or dream up. And so for all of this to come together in April, it came together very quickly. I was hired at the beginning of April. I was elated, excited, overwhelmed, all those words, but it's been great. I finally got my family here a few months ago. We signed 11 guys, 11 new players, and hired a staff and redid our locker room and offices and put together a schedule and all the things that go into taking over a program. But I've loved every day being here. This is home for me. It is not home for my wife, unfortunately, so she's adjusting a little slower than me, but I've loved it. I've always been a person that purpose is always a huge thing in my life, whether I'm up or down, and what's going on in life. And this job, as it relates to my life and my family and the people I've worked for, it provides a ton of purpose in Christ, and where I feel like my life was at and headed. And so all those things kind of came together with my first head coaching job. So now I'm just at that point where I'm wanting to do a good job and represent all the people that have vouched for me to be here.
We'll talk about the rich history of Oklahoma Baptist and sort of the connection that you were familiar with in just a second. But I just want to, I think a lot of guys listening to this podcast might relate to what you just said and mentioned about your wife. And you said it's not home for her, so she's needed to adjust. And, you know, it is home for you. I think a lot of us, especially followers of Christ, want to follow the Lord's will. And sometimes God calls us to places that may not make sense or might not be comfortable, just might be a different change. Tell me about that conversation and when it all came together and talking to your wife and working through all of that to make the adjustment and then move to Oklahoma.
Well, my wife has been in college athletics her whole career. She currently is the associate commissioner of the Atlantic Sun Conference. I met her at Liberty University when she was the head of compliance and the senior women administrator many years ago when I went to work there. So as our story and our marriage has kind of played out, we had already made one move where she wanted me to stay in coaching, kind of one of those valley times in my life personally, in my career. And so when we were in Macon, Georgia, I was working at Mercer University. I'd worked there for 5 years. When this opportunity came up, I think she knew in her spirit that this was our next step, not necessarily at Oklahoma Baptist, but she's the one that had kept my career alive in regards to prayer and encouragement and her own sacrifice with her own career. So I don't know that we both didn't think that there really wasn't much of a choice, because we had already made certain sacrifices along the way that she had led. And, when I wanted to get out of the profession or quit, when I was unemployed, she was the one that had made sacrifices, and we had moved on my behalf. But really it was her doing, because she has a wonderful career in her own right. And so when this opportunity presented itself, it's in the middle of nowhere as it relates to her. She was born in West Virginia and spent 17 years at Liberty University there in Lynchburg, Virginia. So this is way outside of her comfort zone. And, as when you're a young coach, you always hear coaches talk about, the coaches' wives are, they use all kinds of different terms in a positive way about how, a coach's wife is a gift from God, an angel, or and as you get a little older, and my career had always been on an upward tick. When you start to go down, and your wife stays with you, and your wife stays encouraging you, you really start to see that, those coaches, those older mentors of yours that are kind of winking at you like, I'm glad you got a good wife, coach. You start to see what the tongue in cheek is all about as you get older, because, I don't even know what I would be doing without Meredith. I mean, she's been there right with me, and the adjustment has been hard for her coming to Oklahoma. It's home for me, but it's obviously in the middle of nowhere for her. So I'm one of those guys, like a lot of us Christian men, that I'm far from perfect, and my wife knows that, and she still decides to be with me and support me and love me and all those things. So I was very lucky with that.
Jason Eaker is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Oklahoma Baptist University men's basketball coach. Oklahoma Baptist, for you, there's a rich history there. You mentioned Oklahoma as home, but even more with Oklahoma Baptist. Tell us about that connection that you had and your family had to Oklahoma Baptist, and why that was such a special and unique opportunity for you when it came about to become their head coach.
Well, Oklahoma Baptist, for those of you listening and have never heard of it, back a long time ago, the NAIA basketball culture and just all that went with it has a very rich tradition in itself, just the NAIA organization. So my dad went to school here. He played with a gentleman by the name of Al Tucker in the 60s. He was actually the third pick in the NBA draft. They went to 3 straight national championship games. They won one of them. The coach that my dad played for, who he later followed to Texas Tech, where he met my mom, believe it or not, there in Lubbock, was a gentleman by the name of Bob Bass. And he's recently been in the news because he passed away. And Coach Bass spent, 30 or 40 years in professional basketball. He was the general manager that traded Vlade Divac for Kobe.
Sure.
He was with the Hornets, and then he was with the Spurs before the Popovich era that all of us follow. So my dad played for him. Obviously, when you go to Kansas City in those days, he's playing in front of 10,000 people every night. And they got, arguably the best player in college basketball on their team for 3 of the 4 years my dad was at school. So my dad went to this school, played in all of those games, and they're synonymous with this institution, that era of basketball. So my dad ends up getting out of coaching because Coach Bass goes into the pros, and Gerald Myers got the Texas Tech job. So he ends up going into business and settling us down in a small town in Oklahoma to start working with a young company called Edward Jones. And he was kind of one of the beginning guys with that company. So as we were growing up, my dad loved sports. So we would always listen to the Spurs on the radio, and he would always bring me up here to Oklahoma Baptist once a year to watch an OBU Oklahoma City game or an OBU versus Oklahoma Christian game. And he was always so proud of the school. And now looking back on it, and thinking about his experience at the school, I totally get it now. As a kid, you're just like hanging out with your dad, and your dad's taking you to a game. And so there were some people here he would always introduce me to every year. He would bring me up here once a year. And then as I got older, I started coming to a few of the camps. And the coach at the time was a gentleman by the name of Bob Hoffman, who is now the head coach of Mercer University. He's kind of in the national spotlight. He's the coach at Mercer who beat Duke in the NCAA tournament. And so he was the coach. And so I had bigger aspirations in my own little head about playing at the University of Oklahoma or playing for Eddie Sutton at Oklahoma State. But, I always felt comfortable at OBU. And so as I got older and started to figure out that I wasn't Eduardo Nahara or Bryant Big Country Reeves, I started to kind of look around. And Coach Hoffman began recruiting me. And so I ended up signing here out of high school and coming here. And then as it relates to the bigger picture, the last 5 years I've worked at Mercer University for that same guy, Bob Hoffman. Our careers kind of came full circle. And then the president of Mercer University, him and his wife are graduates here at Oklahoma Baptist. And so I was here for 1 year. We had a coaching change. I ended up moving on with my college basketball career because Coach Hoffman got a Division I head coaching job. But, the gentleman who is the coach, the AD here, was Coach Hoffman's longtime assistant. And I met him when I got into coaching at Texas Pan American. He was Coach Hoffman's associate head coach at Texas Pan-Am, and so our relationship spans back. And he's also an OBU alum who met his wife here, and so the opportunity to work for a coach in today's climate with athletic directors is very rare as well. So I'm working for someone who's connected to me, and whether it's my dad or my Coach Hoffman, or I have tremendous pride in Oklahoma Baptist, and I believe in the school. I came here as a kid to different church activities, camps that we all go to as kids that grow up in the church. So I definitely have some ties to OBU.
Absolutely. It's how's it been? What's the biggest adjustment now as a head coach versus a longtime assistant, and just the responsibilities that come with that?
The biggest adjustment, you've always been told this at all the clinics that you go to and all the people you talk to, is just the decisions that you have to make. You're no longer an advisor anymore. You have to make decisions every day, and they're not, it's not that we're, doctors or anything, but just like daily decisions about the schedule or discipline or the schedule of the games you're going to play, and you're the final yes or no in recruiting. Just the weight of those decisions. And a lot of times you can give your advice as an assistant, and that your advice was what you felt like was right. But as soon as you give it, I had gotten to the point as an assistant where I was going to give my advice, and the bosses that I worked for, whether it was Richie McKay or Bob Hoffman or whoever, Dale Lair, I put some thought into it. But as soon as I gave the advice, I would let it go. I would, whatever coach wants to do with my little opinion, then that's what he's going to do. And he may not even ask. But now, when you put the decisions as a head coach, when you really care about how you're going to do, and you're real, I'm obviously want us to do extremely well. When you put the decision down, you now worry about the decision that you made. Like, was it the right decision? And you kind of see how it plays out. And you have to draw back on your experiences with your faith, as far as God doesn't call us to worry. He calls us to have faith and in prayer and make wise decisions, and not out of anger or whatever the case may be. But you really have to go back to things that you were taught when you were a kid, as to making decisions in a way to where you have confidence, no matter how they play out in the short term, that you did the best that you could with the information that you had in that moment, and you have to just keep moving forward. And the best coaches that I've worked for, whatever decisions they make, they know that they're not going to make the right decision every time. They're very steadfast in pressing on. And so I'm learning that. I have many more years to master that, obviously, but that adjustment has been real, and I was ready for that. I wanted that, and I'm okay with living and dying off of me and my staff's decisions, but it is an adjustment, no doubt.
Take me through the recruiting process. We were talking off the air, and I was telling you about a time when I was speaking in Maine, and you mentioned that you had gone up to Maine to talk to a kid and whatever for recruiting and what that was like. And it just makes me think about that recruiting world of being a college coach, which I don't think the sort of normal fan really understands, the grind that's involved in recruiting. Can you take me through that and just help us understand that, what recruiting life is like? Because I know it's fulfilling, but it's also got to be exhausting.
Well, early on, the reason why I got into coaching was, ever since I was a kid, I always just loved basketball and loved everything about it. I loved shooting in the gym by myself. I loved the thought of just being in a gym and picturing the crowd being there and hitting a big shot and playing for something in the postseason, and watching games on TV, whether it was the Celtics or whoever it was, the Bulls and the Suns during my era when they were awesome. And so you get all wrapped up into the game, and I love it. I mean, I would watch NBA Inside Stuff every Saturday morning, and I love basketball. So when I thought about getting into a career of basketball, I wanted to coach. I wanted to be around, and I wanted to coach in like the highest level, whether it was the NBA or Division I, of all those games that I saw on TV. I wanted to be in the middle of all that because I didn't get it. I knew at that point in college I was never going to be a part of the highest levels as a player, but I started to figure out maybe I could be a part of the highest levels as a coach. So you get involved with it, and it doesn't take you but a few months. I was down at Texas Pan American, and you start to realize when you get into coaching that having a career in basketball has very little to do with basketball. The whole game is who's on your team, because these men that hire you, they've been in basketball for a long time, so they can get us out there into layup drills and defensive drills, but that's initially not what has drawn you to the game. What draws you to the game is the people and the game and the X's and like all those wonderful things. And so right when I got involved with the game, Jason, I wanted to be in it so bad that you figure out for these men to have any value in me, that recruiting has got to be what I think about all the time. And so you have to reprogram your brain, and then if you do that well, then they'll let you be involved with that 5% of your day or your year where it is basketball. And so you don't really realize the sacrifice going in. At a young age, when I finally got my opportunity at Liberty to be a full-time coach and recruiter instead of an off-court administrator that I was at Texas Pan Am and the University of Oklahoma with Kelvin Sampson, you're so excited, and at Liberty, it's the world's largest Christian school.
Yeah.
So you're selling Christ, you're selling Division I basketball, your budget is good. So I'm flying all over the country. I'm single, recruiting. And so at the beginning, it's exciting. It's fun. It is, you kind of live in a little bit of a dream. But as you get older, you start to realize recruiting is just as or more important than you initially thought. But it can become a burden where the travel's not as fun. You start a family, being away from them, and then you're at the mercy of these kids making decisions. And so you can't live out your dream without really good kids. And so you're looking for high character, you're looking for tremendous basketball talent, and the barometer of all that, you're always trying to mix and match of how much talent, how much character can you put into a decision in that school. And so recruiting definitely takes a mature person, and I have not been that the majority of my career. I've been a very immature man. And so I would ride the waves of all the good commitments or the decommitments or the kids that didn't sign. And so that becomes your livelihood as a young person in coaching. Is your whole job is they want you to be around the young people and encourage them and help them with their basketball. But your whole job of how you keep a job, how you do the job, how you have value in the business is you got to be on fire for recruiting. Whether you feel that way that day or not, you have to always present yourself in a way to where you're on fire for recruiting. And so that's not why I got into basketball, but it's what it becomes. And so as I've gotten older, I still see the value in it. It's why we have a chance to be good here, is because of what happened in recruiting. But it's not fun at all. There's nothing fun about it's the most stressful, the least control, the dirtiest, the people lie the most. All of those things are in this pot. And if you can't get out of there alive, you got no shot in the wintertime.
How does your faith affect the way that not affect the way that you recruit, but affect the way that you respond, I guess, to recruiting? Because you got to remember here, you have other schools that are, you're recruiting high character kids who are great basketball players, obviously. And then you have other schools that are recruiting these kids as well. And you do your best. And then you kind of have to, at some point, let the chips fall where they may. And then not every time are you going to get the guy that you're recruiting. And there's got to be a test of your character, a test of your faith. You talked about how it can be a real ruthless business area with recruiting. How is your faith affected and tested through recruiting?
Well, that's a good question. I would say my faith, I would say early on in my career, Jason, if I really wanted a kid and I knew that he was a difference maker at Liberty, all those years that I recruited for that school, I would basically try to become God in that situation, whether it was through letters or phone calls or going to see him. I would try to take that decision and take that school and shove it down their mouths to the point to where they would literally choke on it and commit to our school. And because you hear so many different things as a young coach about this coach gets up at this time of the morning and he writes these 50 handwritten notes and he goes and sees this and he travels and he stays up all night. And so, like John Gruden, he gets up at 3:45 in the morning.
Yeah.
And so that starts to become, man, if I got to do that. And so as I not only pursued kids and lost kids and signed kids and all the situations that play out, and even through my ups and downs personally, I've always been a strong believer and a person of faith, and I've always followed what I perceive to be what God is doing through the lives of others. What you start to see with all these decisions is that I need to do my job, but God is in charge. And so some of the kids that I recruited, and I thought recruited the best that I could possibly do for 2 and 3 years, didn't get. And other kids that I recruited for 3 days ended up coming to that school and finding their mate, finding their life calling beyond basketball. And so as I've gotten older and I've gotten a few years under my belt from that regard, from a recruiting standpoint, the realization, and I've shared this with a family recently, is I met with them. I said, hey, I want you to come to this school. I want you to come to OBU. I feel like you're a perfect fit. But I don't care what you do. I don't feel like no matter what I say or what I do, I'm going to do my job. But I don't think that there's anything that can stop God's plan for your life. And so who am I to interfere with that? I'm going to lay out our school, lay out where you fit, lay out where you are academically, but I'm a firm believer at this point until I don't think my opinion will change. Is that I feel like God's going to do what he's going to do. Like I feel that way about my life. As long as I do the necessary things that he wants us to do. And I'm starting to let go of that in a sense in the recruiting, even though as my tenure here builds up, I'm sure I'll have moments where I'll lack maturity and just absolutely get on my hands and knees for a stud and say, you have to come to OBU and I beg you. But I'm at that point right now where it's challenged me before. I was that coach that would jump up in celebration when a kid committed and be in tears and be disappointed for several weeks if a kid didn't choose us. At times, I'm at a point where I'm at peace with the recruiting, even though I know that ultimately that will define our program in a way with the type of young men that we'll get at Oklahoma Baptist.
That was part one of our conversation with Jason Eaker, Oklahoma Baptist University men's basketball coach. Their season kicks off November 9th against Washburn. And yes, they are a Division II program, which is maybe why you haven't heard of Oklahoma Baptist University unless you're down in that area of Oklahoma. But I love Jason's story. And part one was a way for you to get to know a little bit about Jason. Part two, which comes out tomorrow morning, is where the story takes a little bit of a pivot, and it's a powerful testimony and a very difficult time that Jason walked through. Life struggles, no one's immune to it, right? And so he shares an incident that happened during his time at Liberty. and what he's learned about redemption and restoration and reconciliation and being transparent about our struggles and knowing that those struggles can help others. So that's part 2 tomorrow. We do appreciate Jason for being here on the podcast. Take a listen tomorrow morning for part 2 of our conversation with Jason Eaker. We thank Jason for joining us. We also thank Compassion International for sponsoring this podcast. $38 a month is all it takes for you to release a child from poverty. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum. And again, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And it allows you, the individual, one person, making a difference in another person's life by releasing them from poverty. Food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. $38 a month. You can make a difference. Go to compassion.com/sportspectrum and sponsor a child today. Thanks for listening to part 1 of our conversation with Jason Eaker from Oklahoma Baptist. You can find all of our content over at sportspectrum.com, where we have daily devotionals every single day at 6 a.m. Eastern. You can also check out all of the content, articles, videos, you name it, first-person articles from athletes, all over at sportspectrum.com. And subscribe to our magazine. It's $18 for an entire year. That's all, $18. You get 4 issues. You also get a welcome issue and a couple bonus issues of the magazine. All stories on the intersection of sports and faith. It is a great tool, a great outreach tool to hand to someone, real good-looking magazine, good feel to it. And it's a great opportunity for you to be a witness for Christ by sharing these stories of sports and faith without kind of pushing it in their face or forcing it, which we should never do with our faith, is force it on anyone else. But it's a great way. So for just $18, you can subscribe to the Sports Spectrum magazine. Go to sportspectrum.com and subscribe today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time right here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. My name's Jason Romano, and you guys all have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.